At 8 in the morning on the 21st of June 1942, Major General Hendrik Kloppers sent out a request for terms. He had commanded the Tobruk garrison for less than a month. Around him, 35,000 men were laying down their weapons, and the demolition parties were still working through the fuel dumps, burning what they could reach. They did not reach all of it. When the Germans went through the harbor that evening, they found about 2,000 tons of petrol intact, 5,000 tons of rations, and some 2,000 serviceable British lorries. Within days, those lorries were carrying German supplies with German markings painted over the British ones. Tobruk had held out for 241 days the previous year. Rommel had taken it in a day and a half. The assault opened at dawn on the 20th of June with a dive bomber concentration on the southeastern perimeter. The airfield fell around 4 in the afternoon, and German infantry were at the water by 5. Cost to the Panzer Army, roughly 3,300 men. The next day, 22 June, Hitler promoted Rommel to General Feldmarschall. He was 50 years old, the youngest officer in the German army to hold the rank, and within 48 hours, he used that promotion to ask both dictators to tear up a plan they had already signed. The plan had been agreed on the 29th and 30th of April at a conference between Hitler and Mussolini. It had a German code name, Hercules, and an Italian one, Esigenza C3. It was the invasion of Malta. The sequence was set out clearly. Rommel would attack at the end of May, take Tobruk, and stop at the Egyptian frontier. Then the aircraft, the shipping, and the paratroopers would shift to Sicily, and in July the Axis would take the island that sat directly across their supply line to Africa. Kurt Student, the man who had planned Crete, would run the airborne drop. The Italian 185th Airborne Division, the Folgore, had been raised and trained for it. 2 to 3 Italian divisions would come in by sea. On paper, around 100,000 men. Malta was already close to finished. From January to April, Kesselring's Luftflotte II had bombed the island from Sicily, almost without pause. The submarine flotilla based there was driven out. The strike aircraft were destroyed on the ground or withdrawn. On 15 April, King George VI awarded the George Cross to the island itself. With Malta suppressed, Axis convoy losses on the African run dropped away, and Rommel's army was receiving something like 60,000 tons of supply a month. That was what had paid for Gazala and for Tobruk. On the afternoon of 21 June, Kesselring flew to Rommel's headquarters and reminded him of the agreement. Stop at the wire. Then Malta. Rommel refused. As commander in the south, Kesselring had no authority over Rommel's ground operations, and the two men parted without settling it. Rommel was formally under Italian command through General Ettore Bastico and the Comando Supremo in Rome. On the 22nd of June, he went around all of them. He appealed directly to Mussolini and through German channels to Hitler. His argument was that the Eighth Army was broken, that his own troops were in good order, and that the British dumps he had just captured had solved his supply problem for him. On the 23rd of June, Hitler wrote to Mussolini backing him. In the translation most often quoted, the letter says that the goddess of fortune in battle passes a commander only once, and the man who fails to seize the moment never gets a second chance. Mussolini agreed. Hercules was postponed, nominally to September. By the end of July, it was dead, and the divisions earmarked for Malta were sent to Africa instead. That same evening, 23 June, the Afrika Korps crossed the Egyptian frontier. It had 44 tanks in running order. On 29 June, Mussolini flew to Libya with journalists and party officials and installed himself at Berta, west of Derna, to wait for the fall of Egypt. He waited 3 weeks and flew home. Most of what is known about that week sits in conference minutes, signals traffic, and the letters the two dictators sent each other. Records like those are what Warshelf is made of, a library of short books on this war, one story each, taken down through 10,000 pages of documents. The link is in the description. On 29 June in Cairo, Colonel Bonner Fellers switched to a new cipher. Fellers was the American military attaché in Egypt, and for the better part of a year his daily dispatches to Washington had been read in Berlin and Rome before they were read in the War Department. Italian intelligence had lifted the Black Code from the American embassy in Rome in 1941. The Germans called the Take die Gut Quelle the good source. It gave Rommel British tank strengths, British losses, British intentions, and British morale in detail from an officer with access to Middle East command. London finally proved the compromise to Washington in June. On the 27th of June, a German propaganda broadcast quoted Fellers word for word. 2 days later, the source closed. 11 days after that, on 10 July, the Australian 26th Brigade attacked at Tel El Isa on the coast and overran a cluster of vehicles sighted about 1,000 meters behind the front line. It was Nachrichtenfernaufklärungskompanie 621, Rommel's own radio intercept company. 73 men were captured with their equipment and their files. Their commander, Hauptmann Alfred Seebohm, was mortally wounded and died shortly afterwards. The Eighth Army now had the documents showing exactly how much its own radio traffic had been giving away. Inside 3 weeks of the decision to drive on Cairo, Rommel had lost both of the things that had let him read the British Army. He had also run out of desert. The position the Eighth Army fell back on runs about 40 miles, from the Mediterranean coast south to the edge of the Qattara Depression, a basin of salt marsh and soft sand that will not carry heavy vehicles. Every victory Rommel had won in Africa had come from swinging wide around an open southern flank. At El Alamein there was no flank. There was a 40-mile front and nothing to go around it. What he could not see was how close he had come anyway. On 1 July, in Cairo, British headquarters and the embassy burned their secret files, and so much charred paper came down over the streets that the day got a name, Ash Wednesday. The Mediterranean fleet cleared out of Alexandria. Trains left packed for Palestine. That was the same day Rommel attacked at Alamein and was stopped. He attacked again on the 3rd of July at Ruwayzat Ridge, where British 2-pounder guns knocked out 18 panzers at close range. Auchinleck, who had relieved Ritchie and taken direct command of the 8th Army himself on the 25th of June, told his troops that the enemy was stretched to the limit and thought he was facing a broken army, and hoped to take Egypt by bluff. Through July, the two sides hit each other and neither broke. British casualties for the month passed 13,000. At least 7,000 Axis troops went into the cages. Behind Rommel, the arithmetic was closing. The front was now roughly 370 miles east of Tobruk and 1,300 miles from Tripoli. Tobruk harbor, rated on paper at 1,500 tons a day, in practice handled rarely more than 600, with its cranes wrecked and ships sunk in the approaches. A single motorized division consumed around 350 tons a day, water included. Over the first 8 months of 1942, about 40% of what the Panzer Army needed actually reached it. Taking Malta would have changed what survived the crossing. It would not have changed what the ports could unload or what the trucks could carry forward. But Malta was not taken, and Malta came back. The recovery had already started. On the 1st of 9th of May, 64 Spitfires flew off the carriers Wasp and Eagle, and this time were dispersed, refueled and airborne again within minutes of landing. The Luftwaffe lost daylight control of the island. In July, the submarines came back to Grand Harbor. In August, the British ran 14 merchant ships through to Malta behind 2 battleships, 3 carriers, 7 cruisers and 23 destroyers. 5 got in. The tanker Ohio arrived on the 15th of August with her decks nearly awash, lashed between 2 destroyers, and her oil kept the island's aircraft and submarines flying and sailing. From then on, the strikes came off Malta against the convoys crossing to Africa, guided by signals the British were reading. Through the late summer, roughly a third of the supplies sent to Rommel went to the bottom. By October, it was closer to half, and the fuel losses ran higher than that. At the end of August, Rommel made his last attempt. He launched at Halfa on the night of 30 August, only after Kesselring and Cavallero promised him the fuel. The tankers San Andrea and Pichi Facio were sunk on 30 August and 2 September. Kesselring handed over Luftwaffe fuel to keep the panzers moving, which left the air cover grounded. Rommel's armor was funneled into prepared ground in front of Alam Halfa Ridge and bombed there for 3 days. He broke off on 2 September having lost around 50 tanks and 3,000 men. On the 23rd of September, he went on sick leave to Austria, and it was on that trip that Hitler finally handed him the physical field marshal's baton. At 21:40 on 23 October, about 900 British guns opened together across the 40-mile front. Montgomery had 195,000 men and over 1,000 tanks, including 385 Shermans. The Panzerarmee had 116,000 men and around 500 tanks, fewer than half of them German. Georg Stumme, standing in for Rommel, died of a heart attack in the desert on 24 October. Rommel reached his headquarters from hospital on the evening of the 25th. By 3 November, the Afrika Korps had about 35 running tanks. That day, Hitler's order arrived, telling Rommel he could show his troops no road but victory or death. Rommel held for roughly a day and then pulled out what was left. In the southern sector, holding a line of slit trenches with a handful of obsolete 47mm anti-tank guns and petrol bombs, was the Folgera. The paratroopers had been shipped to Libya in July, once Malta was shelved, and put into the line as ordinary infantry. They were destroyed at Alamein. The survivors walked out on foot at 2 in the morning on 3 November, out of water and out of ammunition. Within 6 days, the Axis lost close to 30,000 prisoners, 7,800 Germans, and 22,000 Italians. Von Thoma was captured on 4 November and had dinner with Montgomery that evening. 4 days later, on the 1st of November, Anglo-American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, an operation planned since the summer and entirely indifferent to anything decided outside Tobruk in June. The retreat ran 2,000 miles to Tunisia. Rommel was flown out sick in March 1943 and never came back to Africa. On 13 May, the Axis forces in Tunisia surrendered, around 250,000 men. Alexander signaled Churchill that all enemy resistance had ceased and that they were masters of the North African shores. An Italian paratrooper named Battista Drovero had written in his diary the previous summer, after Tobruk fell, that Rommel's victory had taken away their chance to fight, and that nobody talked about capturing Malta anymore. Nobody ever did. The island was never invaded.